Look and see for yourself. Don't believe. The trick is, think for yourself. Don't believe what you've been told. Just because someone tells you something doesn't mean it's true. Look at politicians. They're saying all sorts of lies all the time. And you've been told, oh, you exist in space and you exist in time and you're a small separate being and there's a big, huge world that exists outside you and an even bigger universe that world is in and all of these things. So you've been told all these things, and of course, like all of us, you were naive and you believed it, at least provisionally. But then, if you say, well, maybe, what would it be like if I'm very purely skeptical and said, maybe, what would it be like if none of that was, if I couldn't know that for certain, if I had to look for myself and see what I could find that's undeniably true. And so when I look, I find my experience. There's a fact of experience is happening right here. And if I'm very honest with myself and very careful, I can't get beyond that. I can say the experience is happening. Then I can say, is the experience of a world? And if I look and I'm honest, I can say, well, it may be. That's a hypothesis. There may be a world that I'm experiencing. But then I can think back to my dreams, and in the dreams there can seem to be a world present, and I wake up and I know there was no world there. So how can I prove with certainty that this world actually exists? And the answer is I can't. So it's simply a matter of seeing what is undeniably self-verifyingly true, self-verifyingly actual, and anything that's not undeniably self-verifyingly actual is just a hypothesis, it's a possibility. There may be an objective world, there may be other beings, there may be objects, there may be cause and effect, but all of that are possibilities that exist within the context of this actuality of the undeniable presence of my experiential field. I can't know if your experiential field exists at all. I can't know if you experience. Maybe you're just present in my experience. Maybe you're just a pattern of light on my computer. How can I know? And you can't know that about me either. You can't know if I'm experiencing. All you know is that I seem to be showing up in your experience, right? So that's undeniable. Maybe I exist like you do, and maybe you exist like I do, but we can't know that. So it's a matter of extreme skepticism. Extreme, do not accept anything as true unless it's undeniably, self-verifyingly true. And if you do that, there's only one thing. There's only one thing, which is the fact of experience. And everything else is guesswork. Everything else is hypothesis. Maybe there's gravity. Maybe there's space. Maybe there's time. I mean, there seems to be space, right? You go to sleep and the space disappears. You start dreaming and all of a sudden there's a new space. So which space is real? Then you wake up and all of a sudden this space is here. So is there space? You can't say, but you can say there's experience. And space and seeming spaces can appear within experience, and so on and so forth.
But normally with objects, I don't see unresolvability so much. I just mostly see the object. But I know everything everything like changes, it's not what's here 1 second isn't here the next second. So it's sort of the fact that everything changes so quick. Is that part of the unresolvability also?
Don't think in terms of objects, think in terms of experience. So,
right.
So yeah. If you have, here I have this coaster, for example. Now,
right.
So I think of it as a coaster, all of a sudden it's an object. But if I think of it as an experience, this experience is different than this experience, which is different than this experience, which is different than this experience. So see, the experience is changing continuum. Now I can think of the coaster as a fixed thing that's actually there and is actually a certain shape and a certain size, and I can think that I'm moving it around in space. It seems to get bigger and smaller from parallax and so on. But but I can't find any object like that. All I can find is the experience. And the experience itself is unresolvable. Does the coaster look like this, or does it look like this? Does it look like this, or does it look like this? Does it look like this, or does it look like this?
Right.
It looks like any and all of them. There is no coaster. There's only the experience, and the experience is never the same way twice.
Yeah, that's a lot easier.
Yeah, so you see your face in the mirror, and every time you see your face in the mirror, you've never seen exactly that image before. And then in the next instant, it's already different, just because you've shifted a tiny fraction of an inch to the side, or you blinked, or whatever. It's not the object. There are no objects. There's only experience, and we imagine the experience as experience of objects, but that's imaginary. You can't verify that objects actually exist. All you can verify is that experience exists. And if you think of a dream, this will become very obvious, where there are no objects, and yet there seem to be. And you wake up, and all of a sudden, all the objects, poof, they instantly disappear. And when you go to sleep, all the objects in this supposed world instantly disappear too, don't they? Interesting, eh?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot easier.
Yeah.
When you feel your being, let's say, and nothing else, when there's not a lot of objects appearing except just blackness, and the feeling of you, the feeling of your being is sort of, it's there, but it's unresolvable too. It's not any particular. There's not any particular thing you can point to. It's just, you just feel it's there, even though there's no locus of that. Does that sort of translate up into, let's say, normal waking life? That normal waking life is just sort of a rubric of that.
Sure.
It's just sort of it's that with a lot of embroidery.
And it's important to notice that it's never no objectification whatsoever. You never get pure being with no degree of experiential qualities. Even if it seems to be a black space, that black space is an experiential quality. But it's never actually like that. If you look more sensitively and more subtly, there's always an infinity of at least subtle perturbations. And all that this is, like for example in your waking experience, is still an infinity of subtle perturbations. But the sensitivity can resolve that into the complexity of our sensory experience.
Right.
But say in deep sleep, there's exactly the same amount of subtle perturbations, but they aren't being resolved into all of this seeming heavy-handed elaboration. It's the same amount of elaboration, but it's just being interfaced with in a different sense, kind of.
Right, yeah. I mean, everything is everything is that basic being state, let's say.
Yes. Yeah, presence. There's nothing but presence, which is the basic being state, and presence always shows up as radiance, which is the subtle perturbations and elaborations that are intrinsic in how it seems to present itself to itself.
Right.
And
yeah,
that's all that there is. It's here. There's nothing else here. You are that. Your world is that. Your waking state is that. Your meditation is that. Your dreams are that. Your sleep is that. Just variations on the same thing. You never experience this particular configuration of experience that seems to be appearing right now before. It never happened, and it's already gone. And now you're experiencing this configuration of experience, and it's never happened before, and it's already gone. And this is always true. There are no objects, there's just experience. There's just, I call it radiant presence, which kind of breaks it down. But it means, what I'm referring to when I refer to radiant presence is exactly the same thing that the word experience refers to. This actuality, it is present. It is always, it's present, it's omnipresent. There's never not experience present, right? So it is presence, and it's radiant in the sense that experience is never plain vanilla. It's never nothing. It always presents with complications. It always presents with elaboration, let's say. So right now in the waking state, there's all this color and sound and sensation and thought and whatever. But all of that, it just exists within this presence, the presence of this experience, the presence of this actuality, and doesn't depart from it and doesn't add to it or subtract from it. Experience is always full, and it's always full of itself. It seems to present as all of this incredible, inconceivable spectrum of different differentiable qualities and flavors, but none of them actually resolve as actually being that in the first place, and none of them are anything other than simply experience. None of them are anything other than simply radiant presence. So all that there is radiant presence, here now, like always. And that's what you are, and that's what this is. There's an infinity of different ways to see this, and they're all equally true. They're all equally valid. It's not like, oh yeah, you're really moving through the world and you see it these other ways and they're just sort of weird accidents that aren't true. They're just as true. When you're driving, the world is coming to you. A car is a machine to make the world turn underneath you. Your feet are devices to make the world move beneath you. So you can see yourself as stationary, and you make them. Every time you move your feet and you walk, you're spinning the globe of the earth so that it comes to you differently. For example, it's just as much like that as it is that you're moving through it. You can't tell. You can't pin it down. There's no true perspective. Any perspective that can be experienced is just as true and just as real as any other perspective. So you can use perspectives to your convenience or to your enjoyment, to your pleasure. It doesn't matter. But you're not. There's no way that this is. There's literally no way that this is, and all the ways it can seem to be, which are very contradictory, are all equally true, equally real, equally participatable in.
We talk about experience as almost like a final authority.
Yes.
Can you define experience? Isn't that is our experience based on our perceptions?
No. Experience is what is actual. The only thing that can be found is what we call experience. And everything else we think of, like for example perception or senses or bodies or an objective world and so on and so forth, are abstractions, are concepts and interpretations based on the fact of experience. When you're born, you don't know anything, but the fact of experiencing is present, is actual. And then you learn all of these elaborations about who you are and what the world is and what, all of these then you learn language and you learn logic and all of these things. But all of that is derived from the fact, the actuality of your experience, your experiential presence right here, right now, and it doesn't depart from that. It exists within experience and never becomes more to it. It doesn't actually add to experience. So experience is the fact, and then we can have the abstraction that, oh, I'm experiencing light, and somehow I open and close my eyes, and the light, changes. So maybe my eyes are perceiving the light, and there's perception, and the eyes exist as sensory organs, and I can measure the electrical currents in the brain, and it's going to the brain, and the brain's firing, and all of this. But all of that elaboration is abstraction that exists within experience, the experiential field, and only exists because it appears within the experiential field. So all of that is actually about experience. It's not about eyes and bodies and brains.
So is experience a felt thing, or what is it?
It's the only thing. You could say it's felt, certainly. It's known. Experience knows itself. This is all that there is. Experience knowing itself is like saying God knows God, and that's all that happens here. Experience is literally the only thing that exists.
Yeah, I see that as but as a concept.
But your experience is not a concept. The fact that you're experiencing right now, right? That's not an idea. It's not a concept. It's a fact. You can stop believing it and it doesn't stop. For example, when you were a baby, you didn't know you were seeing, you didn't know you were hearing, and yet you were. And then people teach you, they give you these words, see and hear, and tell you about light and sound, and tell you about eyes and ears. But when you were 1 week old, you didn't know about any of that, and yet it was all right here. And it still is right here. It never went anywhere. That's the only thing that ever was right here. You just become very sophisticated at being able to use abstractions to describe it. I mean,
so what happens to
everyone, of course. Once
the body is gone, what happens to experience?
Well, bodies exist. Bodies come with experience. Experience doesn't come from bodies. There was experience before there was a body. Before you knew you had a body, there was experience. And the actual condition of actuality, the condition of radiant presence, is final and complete. It lacks nothing. It's missing nothing. It lacks nothing. It will never gain anything. It is always completely self-sufficient. And so this is absolutely, by its very nature, complete perfection. Now, if you talk about a psychological condition or an emotional condition of appreciating the perfection versus some kind of a feeling of frustration or annoyance or what have you, then that's a different thing. That's a sort of a sub-quality which is appearing within this perfection as a flavor. It's always trying to depart from itself, and it never gets anywhere, of course, because there's nowhere for it to get. Yes, it's always. I mean, this is why. This is the way I put it. This is responsible for what seems to be time for us. It's always trying to get beyond itself, but of course it never succeeds because there's no beyond to get.
So in human condition, that would be striving. I'm trying something.
Yes, and all of that seeming striving and desire and change and participating in this difference, differentiating and wanting difference, is all just its fundamental motive to try to move beyond itself, to try to explore itself, to try to move within itself. And of course it never gets beyond itself because there is no beyond for it to get. But what you may experience as personal desires or motivations or drives are actually its uprising of spontaneous, energy, whatever. It's being the way that it is in this continual dancing with itself. It never stabilizes. It never settles down. It doesn't seem to resolve itself into a nice, perfect, spherical stasis and just sort of sit there or something like a crystal. It's continually, like experience. Experience is continually ever new, ever weird, variations that have never been seen before and never repeat themselves. And we identify with the aspects of these personally in our own individual strivings and struggles, But in all forms, in all seeming forms and patterns that appear experientially exactly the same dynamism can be seen. As one intuits or perceives or settles into this actual condition more and more directly, then one gets to partake of its flavor, of its fullness and completeness, becomes more and more palpably obvious, and quite delicious, quite pleasing, of course, quite satisfying. As well as its perpetual unresolvability, its perpetual, searching for itself. There's a great beauty in that, but because it's in its impersonality, it doesn't have elements of frustration, just has elements of exploration and sort of wonder, it seems to me. This is it. And all descriptions are absurd and irrelevant, although highly entertaining and potentially lucrative if you're a good bullshitter. That desire is the desire of this to know itself. This is insatiably hungry for itself, insatiably curious about itself, insatiably lusting after itself, and insatiably and eternally engages in self-engagement and self-exploration, dancing with itself, drinking its own essence, its own flavor, in an endless exploration, endless enjoyment. And of course, we experience that as what we usually identify as our personal, motivations and desires and engagement. But it's all just the one. It's just this one thing that's here. That's its flavor. That's its mode. It's like a dream. Anything whatsoever can appear in a dream. A dream can be a nightmare, or it can be a dream of love, a dream of beauty, a dream of just weirdness and frustration. And yet, it's always just dreaming. Not everything that seems to appear, whether it seems beautiful or ugly or whatever, is just what dreaming can appear like, and it never gets beyond the one fact of dreaming. And likewise with this, there's just this one thing that is, this one thing that exists alone, and its nature is such that it can appear with all of these different flavors, but it never becomes anything other than itself. So the flavors don't matter any more than what seems to happen in a dream matters. And even whether you personally get engaged with the flavors and find yourself struggling with them one way or another, that doesn't matter. So you have absolute freedom to be however you're drawn to be, and there's no harm, no foul, nothing to gain, nothing to lose. So it's all pure pleasure, pure enjoyment.
It's amazing.
It is. It's truly amazing. You can seem to drift apart in it. It's like in a dream. You can seem to get lost in the dream. But at the end of the day, all you can do is come back to the fact of the dream, because there's nothing else to come back to. You can't really get lost, even if you're seeming to get lost.
So there's really nothing to understand.
That's right. There's nothing to understand. And yet you can understand that there's nothing to understand very profoundly. And that's where it gets really fun.
Yes, that's where the joke comes in.
Yes, yes. Then you get to laugh with the laughers.
Yeah.